morning, everybody. I'm the CFO of Ergomed. I've been with the company about 18 months. The company is 20 years old. It's actually founded in Zagreb, Croatia, where I came from this morning. Rather sunny climes. So what are we up to? We are building a profitable services business. We provide outsourced services to the pharmaceutical industry. That includes clinical trial services and something called pharmacovigilance, which I'll talk to you about in a second. But alongside of that, we've developed, I hope you'll agree anyways, a rather interesting model for R&D product development. We've developed it in a way that we think that we can expose our investors to the upside that comes with drug development without necessarily betting the farm or losing the farm when it goes wrong. And it usually goes wrong. So we operate what we call a hybrid business model. So that's the two parts of the business. We have the services business, which is the outsourced clinical trial and pharmacovigilance. That business is growing at about 30% per annum organically. It's cash positive, EBITDA positive, and we deploy some of that cash flow and EBITDA in the other side of the house, the products, and I'll explain how we do that. The products give us the sort of breakout potential upside that we don't get from the services business, and we have a couple of very interesting programs in there I'll talk to you about in a second. So let's stick with the services for a minute. We offer a comprehensive range of services through all clinical phases, if you're familiar with that. Phase 1, which is healthy volunteers, Phase 2, dose ranging, and Phase 3 are the large-scale pharmaceutical trials. We manage those on behalf of our pharmaceutical customers. And we also increasingly do something called Phase 4. So these are trials that are conducted after the product has actually been approved. And it may be you're looking for a safety signal, or you're looking to expand indication, or you're just monitoring how the product's being used in real life as opposed to under a controlled clinical trial. And then the red parts of this chart are post-approval services called pharmacovigilance. So this is the monitoring of drugs once they've been approved for safety signals. And you aggregate those reports, and you report them to the regulatory agencies once a year. And if the safety signals become too prevalent, then you may be, in the worst case, obliged to remove the product from the market, or at least add contraindications or side effects to the label of the product. Which is why when you buy a pharmaceutical product, it says it treats something, but there's a long list of things it'll do to you. That's how that long list comes about over a number of years of pharmacovigilance. So the company recorded revenue of 2016 of 39.2 million, an overall growth rate of just right around 30%. That was made up of 18% growth in our larger CRO business. And the CRO business, the contract research business, as you can imagine, is project-based. So you start a trial, you run the trial finishes, and then you have to go and find another customer with a bigger trial if you want to grow that business. It's very sort of project-oriented and harder to grow for that reason. The pharmacovigilance business, on the other hand, is a very sticky business. So if you can imagine, once you have your customer's database sitting on your servers, it is very hard for him to move it to another provider, assuming you're doing a good job. So we have an organic growth rate of about 57% and 63% overall. There was an acquisition we did at the end of the year I'll talk to you about in a second. So overall, 30% growth for our services business. So I sometimes get asked, what is it that makes Ergomed CRO special? How do you compete with Quintiles and Parexel and all these other companies? Quintiles, I think, is 125 times larger than us. So they have more resources than we will ever know. And this is how we do it. All CROs manage clinical trials through hospitals, and it's the hospitals that recruit the patients in the clinical trial. And how they do that is they appoint a project manager, and then they appoint study monitors, and the study monitor will sequentially visit each hospital and each investigator. And we do that too, but we do something else as well. We have something called a study physician group. So this is 12, 15 qualified medics who are literally flying around the world, visiting these investigators and talking to them on a peer-to-peer level about how the study is going, what problems they're having, sharing best practice, etc., etc. Something that you cannot replicate with a project manager or a study monitor. You just don't have that peer-to-peer empathy. And then secondly, we have something called the site management team. So this is very unique inside a CRO. We have about 300 nurses who are working in hospitals on other people's payrolls all over Europe and Asia. And we contract with these nurses to help us on an hourly basis with the full knowledge of their employer, of course. And they do two things for us. When we're pitching for new business, we're able to reach out to these nurses and assess feasibility at the point of care. So we can ask a nurse, how many patients have you seen in your hospital with this indication in the last week, month, year, etc. So when we're pitching for new business, we can come up with a feasibility study so we know where the patients are, we know how fast it's going to take to recruit. It adds a level of credibility that others don't have. And then assuming we win the business, then we use this same group to help us administer the trial on an ongoing basis, making sure the patients show up when they're supposed to, that all the data are collected that are supposed to be collected, they're recorded properly, etc., etc. You wouldn't believe how much work is done at the end of a trial to try and fill in all the little boxes of the data collection just because it gets missed. These administrators make sure that doesn't happen. So the net result is we tend to get more efficient trials, we believe, and the quality of the output that we're able to give at the end is higher than you would normally expect. That's not to say the drug will be approved, but you get a better database to make a decision from. So that was the CRO. The Prime Vigilance is our pharmacovigilance business, and we bought another company called PharmInvent in November of last year, and that explains the differential between the two growth rates I was explaining earlier. So overall, we had 350 employees at the end of last year. We will have close to 500 by the end of this year. We're well over 100 customers, and we're supporting products in more than 100 countries. So you can imagine all the logistics and in terms of time zones and the languages that go with that. We have not lost a customer in the last 2 years, and we have a 95% retention rate over the last 5 years. So as I said, very sticky business. And there are opportunities to acquire other companies in this area, some of which we're looking at today. So I think you might expect to see some movement on that. And then lastly, we won the Queen's Award for Enterprise in 2014, which we're very proud of. So if you look at the services business overall, we have a 20-year track record of performance, more than 500 employees in total, worked on more than 300 studies. We process more than 55,000 adverse event cases per annum. And believe it or not, we're actually running trials in 56 countries today for our customers. So you wouldn't normally expect that. For a company of Ergomed's size, you would typically have a strength in your home markets, and then you would be a subcontractor for one of the large guys. Well, we don't do subcontracting because there's no margin in it. So we actually manage trials on a global basis for our customers. So that was the services side of the house. Now I'm switching over onto the product side, and this is the sort of model we've developed, which I'd be interested in your feedback on it. We call it the co-development model. How it works is we diligence other people's molecules and compounds, and if we like what we see, then we will enter into a co-development agreement with them. And that entails us forgiving between 30 and 50% of the fees that we would normally charge for managing the trial. So 30 to 50%, that's a lot. That's nearly all the margin. And therefore, to do that, you've got to run very efficient trials, hence the site management organization and the study physician group. So we sacrifice between 30 and 50% of the fees, and in return for that, we might get 5 to 15% carried interest in the product. And that carried interest can take two forms. One is a revenue share, so we get 5 to 15% of whatever the revenue the sponsor gets, which might be in the form of in-market sales if he sells it himself. It might be milestones if he out-licenses, or it might be royalties. So that's one model. The other model is that we would take an equity stake in the sponsor company. That only really works best in single product companies because you're then getting a stake effectively in the product, but it's via the equity in the company. We have 2 deals like that. And the reason I described it earlier is so if you can imagine that over a period of time, we might own 10 to 12% of the company or have a 15% interest in the molecule. These things can be worth hundreds of millions of dollars if you make it to market. So we've got 10 or 15% of hundreds of millions of dollars. If it doesn't make it to market, the whole thing falls over. Our investment is extinguished, but the investment isn't sitting on the balance sheet. It was in the form of discounted revenues. So that's all baked into the price. So we actually had one example, a phase 3 program fell over in February of this year. Our stock was off 2 or 3%. Had it gone through, though, we would have had at least $30 million of upside. So here's the portfolio. It's the top half of this chart, these programs here. So we have 5 to 15%. We don't disclose the exact percentage because, of course, that would set the ceiling for the next deal. But there are 5 deals here across 4 molecules. We have one in phase 3. This is the world's largest ever head and neck cancer trial we're running, more than 900 patients. Lorediplan is a product for insomnia in phase 2. That actually announced data in January. The data were very positive. So the sponsor company is now in the process of licensing that. If and when they do, we will get a revenue share of that license. Suvuparin is Modus Therapeutics, single product company in an orphan drug disease. Sepranolone is for PMDD, also came in this year. And then lastly, we have another product with Cellsci for perianal warts. So a nice spread across phases, 3 through 2, and nice spread of indications too. So let me talk about the wholly owned products that we have. So this was, to be honest, a bit of a stretching of the model. We started talking to these folks about doing a co-development deal, and then we kind of fell in love with the product because it sort of checked all the boxes, nice upside, not too much risk, faster market, and something that we could afford to take on ourselves. Most pharmaceutical products cost hundreds of millions of dollars to get to market. This is in the 5 to 10 range. So what is it? It's a technology. It's a 5 amino acid peptide chain, a synthetic peptide, which is this little red thing on the end here, which is pegylated to albumin. And what this has the effect of is you get a sort of a sticky ball with these sort of spikes on it. And these spikes are attracted to thrombin, which is part of the natural cascade in the bleeding cascade. And it accelerates the clotting of a blood in the event of a bleed. And its application would be used in surgery. So, for example, if you were resecting a liver, here, this is an example, you would pour the liquid that we've developed on this liver, and we believe it will accelerate the clotting. It is also much easier to use than the currently available products. So let me give you a hint there. The currently available products take 3 to 6 minutes to clot. Our product, at least in phase 1 trials, only took 1.4 minutes. It is faster market. We think we can be at market in 3 years, 2020 market launch. The phase 2B study is underway, it's running ahead of schedule, and we will have data right around the turn of this year. And then phase 3 in 2018-19, about 600 patients. The beauty of this product is it's ready to use. So if you can imagine that the surgeon has the patient on the slab, patient's bleeding out, he's got the current products he has to mix up, and it's about 8 preparation steps. Meanwhile, the patient's bleeding. Our product, because it's not stable at room temperature, our product is immediately available. You just pull it out of the fridge, squirt it in the wound, 1.4 minutes later, all done. So these are not blockbuster products. We estimate between the two of them, maybe $500 million, which is modest, probably below the investment threshold for large pharma, but a nice opportunity for us. Let's just talk a little bit about the financials. So I mentioned already $39.2 million last year, 30% growth on the previous year. EBITDA before R&D, because we didn't have R&D, last year was 4.1, 3 million after R&D. A couple of operational highlights I'll just pull out. We won new contracts worth £42 million last year. And then our backlog, which is like our forward order book. So this is the value of signed contracts that have yet to be invoiced. And we monitor that all the time because that gives us security and visibility to our forward revenue. At the end of last year was £70 million, up from 59 the previous year. In terms of news flow, we've already had 3 events this year. The Ferrer data I've explained already was very positive. Hemostatics trial was initiated. The Atenas and Tarisdale data were negative. It happens, but as I say, that kind of prove the model in a way. We're able to sustain failures, no real meaningful impact on our stock price. And then we have 2 more clinical events this year and 4 next year. So there's nice news flow coming out of the development pipeline. We are aiming to add 2 of these co-development deals every year. So we got hemostatics and Azarina done last year. I think you will see 2 of these this year. We'd like to get to a steady state portfolio of 10. The reason for 10 is that if you do the maths, you probably expect 2 successes out of a 10. And they would probably, you'd get clinical data every 4 or 5 months. So that would be a nice model for us. We are also working on more services acquisitions. So our current stock trades at between 15 and 18 times EBITDA. We can buy these things between 7 and 10 times EBITDA. A fast-growing pharmacovigilance company would be nearer the 10. A slow-growing CRO would be nearer the 7. So there's a sort of financial arbitrage here, but we're not just doing deals for deals' sake. We are underweight materially in the United States, both in pharmacovigilance, where we're the European leader, and also in our contract research business. So that's our next area of focus. And there are 1 or 2 sort of specialist skills that we'd like to pick up along the way too. For example, maybe an orphan drug company, because we have some expertise there, but that would sort of build out our track record if we're able to find one of those. And then our current strategy is not to pay for the phase 3 costs of Peprostat and Rediflow, these are the hemostatics products, ourselves, but to put together probably a patchwork of licensing deals to cover those costs by third parties. So this slide is a little naive, but it's designed to illustrate in a very simple way what we think our investment thesis is. So we have an ambition to be a billion-dollar company. If you just take the services business today and you grow it at 30%, I think the math is about 16.2 years, you'll have a billion-dollar company. So we don't have the patience for 16.2 years. So what we're trying to do is accelerate that process by exposing our investors to the co-development portfolio. Admittedly, we only have 5 to 15% of that, but hemostatics, we have 100%. So what you see here in this light blue segment is the services business growing steadily at 30%. Over a 5-year period, that alone should treble the value of our company. And then these dark blue pieces are designed to represent the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune that come out of the R&D portfolio. So you have some ho-hum years, some barren years, some good years, and I guess this here would be, hemostatics making it to market, 100% interest. But we think that business model over time will generate superior returns for shareholders than just this one. But we don't want to do it in a way where we're betting the ranch and we have to keep coming back to investors to fund all this. This is all self-funded. So that was it. 3 minutes to spare.
Any questions, anybody? Any hands? Gentleman down here.
You've quoted figures, EBITDA. I was wondering if you give us some idea of cash flow excluding financing in your company.
So the cash flow is lower than the EBITDA. We have a pretty material CapEx program, which is actually to do with the development of software and primarily databases around the pharmacovigilance business. So the cash flow will be skinny this year, 1 or 2 million. But positive is pretty unusual in the drug development business. Is it 197-ish, I think? So can I just make a remark about the share price? Because I know you're all interested in the share price. So the company IPO'd at 160, in July 15. And then it sort of drifted up to 170 or so. And then we announced the hemostatics deal, and it started plummeting. We ended up doing a placing of £9 million at 140, and it was touch and go actually whether we wanted to do that, but we did it. And then the price went down to 120. So there was mass revolt about the hemostatics deal. Some shareholders saw it as a too big a shift in strategy, taking 100% risk. They could live with the co-development thing, but 100% risk was too much. So we won some over. We didn't win them all over, but then we produced good results, which helped. And then we did the PharmInvent deal. I think had we done PharmInvent first and hemostatic second, it would have been a different thing. But then people began to see and believe in the roll-up story that's in the services side of the business. And now we've been sort of thereabouts £2 for a while, I would say.
You talked earlier about some acquisitions, one you made in the past and some future ones. I know you're not going to tell me or us. Are there plans for future ones, and which ones are they?
Yeah, so we actually made 4 last year. So hemostatics, the one that people didn't like. Then there were 2 small CRO ones in Germany. And then PharmInvent, which everybody liked, was the pharmacovigilance business. The problem, if we could, we'd do pharmacovigilance deals all day long because of the dynamics of that business. The problem is there aren't that many independent pharmacovigilance companies around. I mean, we're already a European leader, and we're a tiny company, frankly. So there are a handful, like a 4-fingered handful, of opportunities in the US, and we're plugged into all of them. So we're trying to sort of prize them out, but without trying to be seen to be too desperate. So I'm pretty sure we'll get one of those in a 6 to 18 month time frame. And that would give us a market position in the US. Americans like to deal with Americans. So what we will do is we will keep the US operation, but we may do some of the back office in Central and Eastern Europe on a lower cost base. That will kind of be our model. So I'm confident we'll get one of those. There are reams of CROs available. Anybody that got fired from Big Pharma and was in clinical operations sets himself up as a CRO. It's easy to do. The problem is they look very vanilla, so you need to sort of sift amongst them and figure out the ones that have something special to offer. Because you've got something special to offer, it's a much easier pitch when you're pitching for business. And it's a brutal business, it's a cutthroat business. You need to have an angle or a specialist or a skill set that not everybody else has to be heard at the bid defense, frankly. And that's what we're sorting out. Those guys, they're a little bit more expensive, but there's plenty of opportunities there.
Thank you.
Lots of other hands went up.
How big's the stake that the management team have in the company?
So I'll tell you the answer, but it depends how you think is a good answer. So Miro, the founder, has 44%. I have 0.5%. And I think the other directors between them have sort of 1-ish. So how do you feel about that? See, institutional investors hate that he's got 44% because they perceive some overhang issue. You go to Europe and you speak to European investors, they're very sad when he went below 50 because they like that alignment of interest. They say you can't win.
More questions at the back? Anybody else? Oh. Neil down in the front. No, down the very front now. I think that question's been answered.
Whether it's allowed to ask questions of a co-presenter. I spotted a potential conflict of interest between owning equity and being involved in trials where you are also being the company carrying out the consultancy of the trial. How do you manage that?
Are you talking about the co-development program or hemostatics?
Particularly the co-development.
Co-development program. It has never come up as an issue when we're pitching for business. There is a potential conflict of interest, but it's not like you may think. The conflict of interest is the land grab for patients, because because there are ethical standards, and you can't corrupt a trial. You only do it once. Corrupt a trial in somebody else's trial to make yours look better, so that you just can't do that. And by the way, that happens a lot inside the pharma industry as well. I mean, all these products are all cross-licensed. The thing is rife with conflicts. So the only possibility would be the land grab for patients, and so you would pick off all. And frankly, it's a first come, first served. But we would never use the same investigator for one of our trials for a third, for competitor products trials. So we just keep them separate. But it's first come, first served. So we started the trial first. We go to the best hospitals with the most patients first.
Just following on from that question, isn't there a conflict possibly in how you value the carrying value of your investments if you're in a co-development situation?
So in the revenue share model, there is nothing on our balance sheet for the investment. It's it's negative revenue. So we would have booked 100, we end up booking 50 in revenue and making no margin on that business. So there's nothing there. In the context of the two deals where we get an equity stake in the company in compensation for the discount, the total investment, the way we value that investment is based on because they're both private companies, based on the last VC round they did, up or down. So the total combined value of those, I think £330,000 is non-material.
Any other questions, anybody? I've got one, a cheeky one. Your half year finishes this week, isn't it, I think?
Yes, it does.
Can you tell us what the numbers are going to be?
No.
No? Can you give us a hint? Are you quite smiley, or are you sad, or are they in line with expectations, as your broker would say?
I think if they were out of line, we would be obliged to make an announcement.
Right, okay. Thank you very much, Stephen. Thank you.